Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm Mike Horn, your host, and this podcast is for leaders and coaches who need and want fresh perspectives on what it means to live and to lead authentically. You're a leader who wants to make a difference, but sometimes you feel stuck. You know there's more to life and to leadership than what you're currently experiencing. It can be tough to figure out how to grow as a leader. You might be reading all the blogs and books, but it still feels like you're not making progress. You might even be feeling like you're doing everything wrong. On Authentic Change with Mike Horn, we interview experts who share their insights on how to live and lead authentically. Our guests are trendsetters in building great leaders, teams, and organizations. We provide fresh perspectives on what it means to live with purpose and authenticity. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast. I am so delighted to have in our virtual studio today two dear colleagues, two innovators, two contributors to inclusion, diversity, equity, organization development, real innovators. And it's my great pleasure to be in conversation with Frederick A. Miller today and Judith H. Katz. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about Fred and Judith, and then I'll let them say some words about themselves. Fred Miller is a past member of the board of directors of Ben & Jerry's Homemade Inc. He currently serves on the boards of Day and Zimmerman, Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute Center for Automated Technology Systems, and Hudson Partners. Fred was the first person to serve on all three boards of the most prestigious organizations in his field, ATD, formerly the American Society for Training and Development, the Organization Development Network, and National Training Labs, NTL. Fred is the CEO and lead strategist of the Kaleel Jamison Group. And just in terms of some of his recognition, honored as one of the legends of diversity by the International Society of Diversity and Inclusion Professionals, named as one of the 40 pioneers of diversity, and noted as one of the forerunners of corporate change in the age of heretics. And that's not even a quarter of Fred, or an eighth of Fred. And I'm going to have them introduce each of themselves in just a moment. But let me talk a little bit about Judith Katz. She has been fueled by her passion for addressing systemic barriers, known for her boundless energy and sharp analytical mind. She is a distinguished thought leader, practitioner, educator, and strategist for more than 40 years, for more than 4 decades at this point. She's created new paradigms in organization development, pioneered cutting-edge approaches to white awareness, inclusion, the leveraging of differences, covert processes, and strategic change. Judith has brought us to think more critically about ideas and issues that are so important in how people work together and how people come together. And she's been widely recognized for her extensive contributions, named a Pioneer of Diversity by the Profiles in Diversity Journal, a Legend of Diversity, and she received the Organization Development Network's Lifetime Achievement Award and the ODN's Larry Porter Award and the Outstanding Achievement in Global Work Award. Again, maybe, a 16th about Judith at this point, but so delighted to have these innovators, these legends, these active contributors to the world of diversity, equity, justice, inclusion, and organization development. Just an honor. Fred, could you say just a few words about yourself, and then Judith, if you wouldn't mind as well? I mean,
yes, thank you, Mike, and thank you for all those who are listening to this podcast. Really appreciate it. Fred Miller with the Kaleel Jamison Consulting Group. We're a management consulting firm that specializes in organizational development. The firm's been around since 1970. I'm founded by a woman named Kaleel Jamison, since deceased. I was born and raised in Philadelphia, ended up working with a company in Connecticut General Life Insurance Company, started there in the late 60s. I'm one of the first Black African Americans to come in as a management trainee. And that company, we started doing work around differences in 1970. So I've been involved with work around differences since 1972, actually, and working in that company and then others. The first company was Polaroid, the second was Procter & Gamble, and we at Connecticut General were the third company, now called Cigna. And Judith and I have written several books. One of our early books that we edited was called The Promise of Diversity, which was really talking about diversity and all that it meant. And it was around Horizon. We wrote that book in the early 2000s. And then the book that we wrote that's really was the landmark book was Inclusion Breakthrough. We wrote that in 2002. It was the first book ever written about inclusion. We basically coined the phrase inclusion as it relates to working inside organizations. So we've been in this space a long time, worked with many, many, many organizations. Now I'm sure we're up to over 100 and some organizations we've worked with, usually from anywhere from a year, 2, 3, 4 years, sometimes 5 or 6. And it's a delight. I love the work. I love what we do. I love seeing organizations change. And we are an incredible period of time right now as we're living our lives in this 21st century.
Fred, thank you so much. And, Fred and Judith, I've seen so much in the last few weeks in the press on the 20th anniversary of the Inclusion Breakthrough. So congratulations. Is there going to be a new edition? Maybe Judith?
Well, I don't know about a new edition, but there'll be new books. So we're cooking on new books. But it's great to be here, Mike, as always with Fred. So let's see. I currently live in Washington, D.C. I've been here about 30 years, but I'm a New Yorker at heart. I grew up in New York City, and I'm of that generation of women that was kind of like going to Queens College, which was right down the street and cost nothing. Nobody knows about that anymore. It was Queens College or no college, and I was going to get an elementary ed degree and something to fall back on. But that didn't turn out to be my scenario at all. And I think what really played a role in my life and thinking about change was being the child of Holocaust survivors. So in many ways, I think that shaped a lot of my values and thinking about change and thinking about justice in formidable ways. But before I met Fred, which we'll talk a little bit about in a moment, I actually went right from undergraduate to graduate school and then taught at the University of Oklahoma. So even though I'm a New Yorker and an East Coast person, I lived in Oklahoma for a number of years, which really helped me think about change differently because it was a very different way of engaging. So I've been very fortunate to be in different places around the world. And I make DC my home now. And I basically sort of retired a couple of years ago, but as we just said, I'm working with Fred on a couple of new books. So we'll talk about those in a minute as well. So thanks, Mike, for having us.
Oh, that's so great. And most of our listeners are interested in the topic of authenticity and authentic leadership, about how you bring more of who you are to what you do, whether you're an executive leading a team, a division, or an organization, or a coach to one of those executives who is on their authentic leadership journey. And we think a lot about authenticity as some congruency, that your words and actions match, and even better, if your thoughts, words, and actions match, that it all creates some alignment. And, that creates some happiness, I think, as the outcome. And we're always curious as to how people are pursuing their past and what contributed to their past and to their careers. And Judith, I'm wondering if you could talk about first, and then I'll ask Fred a similar question about what's contributed, what led you to your career. I mean, were there some values that you talked about, being, a child of a Holocaust survivor? Certainly, you took something away there from humanism.
That's a great question. I was thinking about the most important thing when I think about authenticity is knowing who I am and trusting my experiences and trusting my voice and trusting my passions. And I think early on, I was very fortunate, back to Queens College, to have been in my first encounter group and T group, which focused on interracial issues because it was the 60s. And so in many ways, I think what I learned from the NTL experience and from that was to really know that my feelings were not alone and that what I was feeling, other people were feeling as well, and to make that vocal and to make that legitimate. So I think one of the things when I think about authenticity and what has led me was really always when I've been my best self, listening to that voice, listening to my passions. I went from these interracial groups to really understanding the role as a white woman about how to deal with racism, and went on to do my doctoral work at UMass and really focused on creating a systematic training program for whites to address racism from a white perspective. And I think in each of those experiences, whether it was great mentors like Edie Seashore and Elsie Cross and many, many of the greats in the OD field, the organization development field, each of those individuals really helped me find that authentic voice. And I think one of the reasons why our work has been so accessible and so successful has been because we bring our full selves into these conversations. And so, I'll never forget one of our best clients once said to us that you care about us, right? That one of the things that Fred and I brought to the client was they felt like we cared about them as individuals, as a system, as an organization. And to me, that's been an important part of authenticity, and being able to really find that voice of who we are and to be not fearful and to have the courage to be bold enough to speak that voice.
So interesting.
So I would think those are the things that really.
You both know one of my earliest mentors, Warren Bennis, and at one point Warren wrote, as a prolific author, right, on topics of leadership, and Warren wrote at one point that never has so much been written about so little, and yet, maybe leadership, Judith, to your point, boils down just to two things: it's that you care, and that you're willing to do something about your care. And you reminded me of that. What a great way to think about that. What a high compliment to be extended that you cared.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think the courage to be human, the courage to be fully ourselves. And I think those are some of the things that have really shaped me, helped me, and also that I think we bring to our client systems.
And Fred, how about you? What drew you to all of this?
I think one of the keys for me was being an African-American man growing up in the late 40s and the 50s, and all the stuff that was around being Black in the country. Still a lot here now today, and there was a ton there with laws behind them. And so really learning what was my stuff and what was somebody else's stuff, and getting clear about, what were they saying about me that didn't relate to me, relate to some stereotype or something else, and what did I need to learn about me so I could be a better and better person. So it's part of constantly learning, still today, learning and growing and developing. But, I was an African-American young man in the inner city of Philadelphia. I had friends that went to prison. I had, friends. One of the friends that I had was one of the smartest people I've ever known, and he died of overdose. So, coming up in that community and seeing those things, I was like, there's got to be another path. I'm not sure the path that I wanted. I was fortunate enough to go to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, a historically Black college. And I saw many, many Black, it was all male at the time, many, many Black men. And I was like, wow, there's a range. We're smart. We're capable. The world's trying to keep us down, but we have a lot to give to the world. And it really helped me get more self-confidence and a belief that if not I knew others who looked like me that could be much more successful than what I saw on TV or I saw walking around the streets of Philadelphia. So that was transformational for me. And then leaving there and going to Connecticut General and working there and beginning to start programs around differences also helped me see that people can come together, that we don't have to be as separate as we've been, that we can learn from each other and grow from each other and be better because of that experience. And that helped me a lot. And then I had a lot of, Judith named some of them, a lot of godparents around me. Edie and Charlie just being two of them, but Peter Bale, Peter Block, it goes on and on and on, Elsie Cross. Just people who were just wonderful. And then Judith and others who were peers. And I could watch them and experience them and learn from them. And then I met Kaleel Jamison in 1970. And that helped change my life. And we worked together for several years before she died at 53 years of age. And she was a great partner, Lebanese ancestry, first generation. I learned a lot from her. And then moving into the firm. And when Kaleel died, taking over the firm. And had Judith joining me in the firm and then growing the firm. And we've been various numbers. One time we were up to like 40, 45 people. Our sweet spot is probably around 20 some. A lot of administrative and project people who are here in Troy, New York with me. And then consultants who are all over the world. And then the clients. The clients have been wonderful. I've learned more from clients than anybody else. Learning and growing from them, being challenged by them, challenging them, stretching myself, and having a chance to work in many, we're working in areas of people. How can humans be human inside organizations? That's what we're trying to create. And therefore, the industry doesn't matter. The geography doesn't matter. It's helping people be great and bring their greatness to an organization.
Yeah, less about human resources and more about people. Maybe what we've been talking about for, a long time. Fred and Judith, I'm so curious. Were there any catalysts that propelled you to your careers, or were there, was it? Was there a burning bush, or was it really, sort of a burning, silent desire? And I wonder about that because, here we are celebrating 20 years of the inclusion breakthrough. And you were working in this field 20 years before that.
I have a burning bush for sure. So I was, when I was an undergraduate, I went to a workshop in New Jersey, and it was run by the National Conference of Christians and Jews. And when I got there, it was supposed to be a 1-week workshop on diversity issues. At the time, it was called something else, multicultural or whatever. And I got there and it was 85% Black and Puerto Rican and 15% white. And the staff starts with what they call the panel of Americans. And a Black woman got up and she said, I don't care about you white folks. If you learn something, great. And if you don't, that's okay. But if you're going to do work on these issues, go work in your own community. And it was like, holy moly. Like, I had never kind of heard that before. And that really sent me on this quest of what could I do as a white person around racism? And it really got me clear that my work was to deal with other white people around that. And that really just started my whole career. I always said, I didn't choose my career chose me. And in many ways, I feel like it was chosen, I didn't consciously say, let me study this. But that was a moment. I can still feel it viscerally in terms of when the lights went on and it was like, whoa, this is the work I have to do. This is why I'm on earth. So that was just one of the many kind of pivotal moments, but it was clearly pivotal.
Oh, amazing. Fred?
Yes, when I was at Connecticut General, I was working as an administrator in the group pension department. And I went to this workshop, first workshop they did around diversity. Wasn't called diversity in those days. And I came back and I was like, okay, I want to work hard. I'm going to do it. I want to be the first Black vice president or the first Black officer in the history of the company. The company had started during the Civil War. So I've been around a long time, had a lot of time to promote Black people, but it hadn't. But I saw this as an opportunity to say, all right, that's what I want to do. I want to be the first officer of the company. And the people who are running these programs called me and said, Fred, we'd like you to join us and be part of the effort. I said, no, I don't want to be a part of a Black thing. I don't want to be a part of that. I'm going to be a line officer in the organization. I want to be the first Black, And one of my white mentors in the organization said, Fred, I want to tell you, I want to be straight with you. If somebody doesn't change this company, you're never going to be the first Black officer. And so if you want there to be a first Black officer, you need to transfer down and work on this program because we need to change this company. And it's not going to happen without somebody putting some energy into it. And I think you're the person. I was like, oh my God, drop the mic. What am I going to do with that? So I transferred out of the pension department and went down and started working in the HR department as part of this effort. And it was the path not taken that I took and changed my life forever. And I loved it. And by the way, I still ended up being the first Black officer promoted from within. So it still worked out, but you never know where the path's going to take you until you take it sometimes.
Well, that's an and story for sure, huh?
Yes.
A lot of this seems to be so driven by mission and, personal quest. And we've talked about pathways that have led you there. We've talked about inspirations in part. But when you think today about, the important work you're doing at the Kaleel Jamison Consulting Group, in the other venues where you're influencers, what's the mission and quest at work, Judith?
Sure. I think we're really trying to, and I think it's evolved as we are getting smarter, but I think it's really creating a safe space in organizations in which people can be their best, do their best, can really contribute their best, that they can be big and safe enough, feeling, we wrote a book, one of our last books was Safe Enough to Soar. And the whole notion, which we've been talking a lot around, interaction safety or psychological safety, Amy Edmondson's work, is really enabling people to really be able to contribute fully. And I think that there's so many impediments, but our mission really is to create those at the individual level, at the team level, and at the organizational level. And we're in such a time right now of dramatic change. Fred and I are just working on an article right now that's looking at quiet quitting and the Great Resignation and this whole question about remote work and what are the challenges for leaders to really shift tremendously. And I think fundamentally people want to contribute and people want to do their best. Now, the terms of that are changing, but I think we want to keep on transforming organizations to enable that to occur. And I think that's one of our major parts. And at some point, if you let me, I'll read from our book, Be Big.
Yeah, that'd be great. Judith, I'm wondering too, if you have a part there, I'd love to hear it. I'm also wondering about how do you think we're doing on that mission of talking with each other, of bridging our divides, and then that might lead into some discussion about the values that shape that kind of work that you're doing with Fred. But Judith, how are we doing today? What's our progress?
Our progress is not great. And I think it depends on organization to organization, leader to leader. I think some companies have really taken this notion about what can be in the workplace and have really moved it tremendously. And I think there's a lot of forward thinking. If you look at, for example, TaskRabbit and some of the organizations that have said, okay, we're going to go fully remote and we're going to find new ways for people to connect. We're going to find new structures for people to engage with each other and recognizing that connection is so important, not just getting a task done. And then you've got organizations that want to go back, right? They want to go back to the way it was pre-pandemic and are saying to people, you come into the office or else. And we know where that's going. So I think there's a bifurcation around that. And I think we're seeing, we are fortunate to work with great leaders who really want to make a difference and really see the possibilities. And then we've also seen and heard about organizations where their whole thing is they don't want to create a safe environment for people, and they don't want people to have their family and their agenda being as important as their work life. So we see it on both ends of the spectrum. And we know, as we've seen historically, that many organizations don't survive through these transition moments because they don't do the work that's needed to truly transform to how they need to be. So that would be my assessment. Fred may see it differently. He's kind of been on the front lines more recently than I.
And I agree with you, Judy. I think there's a range. And I think we're privileged as a consulting firm, the Kaleel Jamison Consulting Group, to really work with organizations who want to make a change. They're not calling us up and saying we're resistant to change. Let's hire these consultants. They're calling us because they feel like we know we can be better. And during the whole, right after George Floyd and all that, we got tons of calls. We usually get maybe 2.5 potential client calls a month. In a 3-week period, we got 75 calls. There were organizations saying, we haven't done anything, or we haven't moved fast enough. We got to do something different. Well, what do we need to do? We call companies and say, we need a culture change. And we know it's going to take 3 to 5 years. Can you help us? So I feel like and it might be a sliver. It might be just a few organizations. But, we talk about the Fortune 500, a few organizations, it's 50, 60, 70, some of the largest companies in the country who are saying we need to get different. We need to treat our people different. I feel like sometime in the 90s or early 2000s, it was like, people don't count. We don't need people. We just need product and customers. And I think companies are coming back to saying, we're not going to get there without our people. And our people are more important than ever. And I think that's kind of the tug we're in right now. How important are my people? And if they're important, how do I treat them as if they're important? And I think organizations are just kind of learning, what does that mean? What kind of autonomy do people need to have? What kind of agency do people need to have to do their jobs? The old days of a manager or supervisor looking over your shoulder is gone. The days of, you trust me? Let me do my job. Yes, I want to partner with my manager and my peers and others, but I want to make sure that I'm bringing my value added to everything that I touch. So I see some companies doing some wonderful things. I think we're all in a period of unknowns. So nobody can be sure about this is the absolute right path. But I think companies are experimenting with things. And as long as they experiment and bet on their people, I think they're going to win.
Yeah, so great, Judith and Fred. I think that most leadership is highly resistant to training. And if we can really work on values, we can work on agency, we can work on self-awareness and personal accountability to bring who you are and to create the kinds of systems and environments that allow that to happen. It would be great. And that is part of Be Big, isn't it, Judith? Were you going to read something from Be Big? I'd love to hear it. Yeah.
Wonderful. So this is a book Fred and I wrote in 2008. And it's called Be Big, Step Up, Step Out, Be Bold, Daring to Do Our Best Work Together. And so this is the introduction, the need to be big. I am daring you to think bigger, to act bigger, and to be bigger. I dare you to think creatively. I dare you to lead and inspire others. I dare you to build character. I dare you to share. And if you do, I am promising you a richer life and a more exciting life. And that was actually taken from a quote from William Danforth in a book called I Dare You in 1931. And he was the founder of the Ralston Purina Company. So I always love that, even at that time, right, these concepts are not new in many ways. But then I'll just do our conclusion, which is daring to do our best work together. If I bring my full self and step up, step out, and be bold, if I take my blinders off and really see you, and if you do the same, together we can do our best work and be big, bigger than anyone could imagine. It starts with me daring to believe I matter, getting out of my comfort zone and having the courage to step up, step out, and be tall. Being willing to show up fully, giving my best, being my big self so that I can do my best work. But that is not enough. I then must be daring enough to see you. I must take my blinders off to reach out and engage you and support you in your journey as an individual so that you can be your best and be your big self and do your best work. But that is still not enough because this just creates the possibility of a we. Me and you need to be daring enough to see each other as big and to partner in ways to do our best work together. So I think that for us is really what we're trying to achieve is how do we create high-performing organizations where people feel agency, valued, supported, seen, all of those things. And that's leadership, right? That's what leaders need to do.
Yeah.
Is to really help create that environment.
I love the idea about big together. It is the concept of, together we rise. And so wonderful to hear that. And Fred, that involves a lot of behaviors, values, intents, and how all of that relates. I guess if you're a pure behavioralist, you say, well, intent really doesn't matter. It's only what you do. But I'm convinced with all of the great executives with whom we get to encounter and work with, that among them, there is this idea about intent and the ability to, do something that perhaps has never been done before, or certainly just to do it better, not in a, let's fix it rehabilitative sense, but to really change the game for people. So, Fred, how's that all work? I mean, people do count in this.
Absolutely. I also think of a phrase that Judith talks about a lot, which is walking towards your talk. That, people talk about walk your talk. Well, your talk should be ahead of your walk. Your talk should be about your vision. And if you're walking towards your talk, then you're going to be a good partner and move in the right direction. So these organizations, they have an opportunity to walk towards their talk. They have an opportunity to have the vision, have the image, but it also takes action. And they have to do things to convince people. And I think people are more skeptical now than ever about all things, all authority, people, organizations. And so the real challenge is, what are you showing to your people to let them know that they can trust you, that this is a good place for you to be, that there's worth for you to be a part of this organization. We're doing something in the world that matters. We're going to do something as far as who we are that matters. And we want you to be part of that. It's going to be absolutely critical. And if we talk about today, if you want to be higher performing, you got to be inclusive. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. People expect to be included. I always joke, even that Herman in the corner wants to be included. So how do we make these organizations inclusive? Diversity is just a fact. Diversity is a fact of life. Human diversity is here. How do we deal with that? I always joke, but it's not a joke. My daughter's best friends growing up when she was a child were identical twins. Identical twins are not identical. Identical twins are not identical. Even there's diversity in identical twins. So when we talk about diversity, we're talking about humankind. We're talking about one human being interacting with another human being and both respecting what they bring to the party because of who they are, how they are, and their visions and hopes for themselves. And so diversity has to be there. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. What we need to do is make sure we bring the inclusion part that becomes an organizational norm, becomes a management competency, and becomes a way that people interact and do and solve problems inside the organization. We talk about inclusion as the how. Inclusion is how you get things done. It's not a what, it's a how. And if we bring inclusion to everything we do, then that will enhance what we're doing, especially in a world with so much complexity and so many unknowns.
And Judith, how do we sort of, go beyond? How do we continue to make it move forward, what we were describing before? Think about the last organization where I led human resources for the research division. One of our core values was inclusion. And I think it was a value that led us always to strive, to do more, to go beyond measurement in terms of, quantification. And yet, it's so challenging still to create across hundreds or thousands of managers, environments where you're able to pursue that value wholeheartedly. So what is it about this, Judith, that makes it work?
Well, I can tell you it doesn't make it work. I mean, we're seeing so many examples of polarization, right? And societal breakdowns and people feeling isolated and lonely and all of that. So we know there's a lot of forces on the side of not having inclusion. But I do think that people, as Fred said, want to be included. And the question is on whose terms, and people not feeling like they're giving up, but they're gaining more. And so one of the challenges, I think, is helping people feel like they have more to gain when they feel they're seen, when they're valued, when they can engage, and when they're engaging not in a, in a PC way, but in a way that's back to authenticity, right? And so I think one of the things is having those ground rules. One of the things is people having voice. One of the things is people feeling they have some power. One of the things that we really have worked on a lot is moving from a judging culture to a joining culture, in which I see you as a partner, I see you as somebody who can bring value, even if it's, particularly if it's different. And instead of it saying, when you see something that's different, saying no, being curious, like, what is it that you're seeing, Mike, that I'm not seeing? And so there's a different stance when we're really fully inclusive, that it doesn't mean anything goes. There are boundaries, there are guardrails, but it does mean that there's a curiosity in the system when people see things differently, and we see the gain, that none of us is as smart as all of us, right? That when you bring a different perspective to the conversation, there's something maybe that I'm not available to see. And I think that's when we're really successful, is when people can put away their differences to accept their differences, and not be living those differences, a box that we're in a stance around, but rather that those differences are something that bring more to the picture. Fred and I often like to talk about, one of the books we wrote about was the 4 keys to inclusion, 4 keys that change everything. And one of the keys we talk about is understanding that people stand on different street corners. So if you would imagine there was an accident, right? And there's in the middle of an intersection, and the police are going to ask everybody, what did you see? Whatever. We recognize that no one person understands the full situation. And it's only understanding and getting data from everybody on those different corners and the intersection that you can really get the full picture. And I think when we solve complex problems in organizations, we need all of those street corners and the intersection to really understand the level of complexity. And I think when we really get to that understanding, then we can really lean into the differences as a way of seeing, what am I not seeing? so that I can really be able to understand the full picture or the full complexity. So to me, that's when inclusion's at its best and most exciting.
Yeah, and for me, what we work on a lot is it's less about culture anymore and more about community. It seems to be a more inviting way. It seems to resonate with some ideas about being included and feeling nurtured and feeling like part of something that is bigger, and getting people to care in small groups makes a difference that multiplies in organizations. And that's I've noticed that in the since the pandemic is more emphasis on communities and what we can do to create community against so much noise.
Mm-hmm. That connection is so important for people, particularly when we've been more isolated, right? We've lost community in many ways. And I love the notion of going from culture to community, because community we can control.
And wisdom really is in the organization, isn't it, Fred?
Yeah. And I like the small unit. You start the team. And I think the team's got to grow out. You got the team, you got the larger unit, and you have the organization unit. To create the safest organization where people can really bring their best, we need the organization to change. We keep saying to our clients now, you got to get different. You got to get different. People got to get different individually. The organization's got to get different. If organizations are thinking I need to be different so I can get the talent of the organization to shine, then they're going to be on the right track. And so for us, it's a systems thing that we need to make happen. And I agree with you on the individual unit level, that is critical. If I don't feel safe on the individual level, I'm never going to feel safe on the systems level. But how does the system enable and empower those various teams in the organization so that they're all moving in a direction that enhances organizational performance?
Yeah, and I think it's such a key leadership lesson. People sometimes ask me, well, what makes for a successful organization development consultant? And I always say, having a client. And, I think also, with leadership, that we often forget this concept of followership.
Right on.
And the responsibility that goes there, and the choices that we make to act in these leader roles.
I think being a great OD consultant or a great consultant is having a client that you're partnering with. You're not the expert with all the answers. You're not having a client that says yes, yes, yes to everything you say, but you're thinking together, you're partnering together. Because even by partnering with them, you're teaching them a skill that's critical for their position around leadership. So for me, having clients that are partners where we're working together, thinking together, experimenting together, and they've got as much skin in the game as I have in the game. In fact, they obviously have more. But I'm letting them know, as Judith said before, trust me, I am here in your best interest. Where I may challenge you, I may at times piss you off, but you need to know that whatever I'm doing it because I think it's in your best interest and the best interest of the organization. And having that contract with the client, because a lot of the CEOs and leaders we work with, people in the organization don't push back on them. And so getting somebody to push back on them actually helps them grow and develop. So we want to be part of that push, and we want to be part of that partnership and that collaboration and that joining together with them. So they have the full range of possibilities and the full range of talent around them so that they can continue to grow and gain and make a better organization.
Yeah, I think among the successful consultants that we have the pleasure of interviewing on the Authentic Change podcast, it may be one of the things that underlies their success over decades, which is really having the best interests of the client at heart. And it doesn't mean that it's not, that it's all a bed of roses or fun and joyful all of the time. There's anxiety in that, and stress, and learning. So it's such a great point, Fred and Judith. Thank you so much about really having the client's best interests at heart. And hey, let's talk about books, though. I mean, as we sort of get closer to the end of our discussion here, I know both of you are going to have a new book coming out in the fall, I think, or a little bit later this year, perhaps towards the end of the year. And but let's talk about what's come before that, and what we can expect.
Well, there's a lot of them. We talked about Inclusion Breakthrough, which was kind of, the 20th anniversary. That was the first book that really talked about inclusion and strategy. And then Fred and I wrote 4 Keys that changed everything, which is really interesting because we had created 12 inclusive behaviors, now conscious actions for inclusion. And one of our clients said, we love the 12, but these 4 changed everything. And so that's kind of how we got that book. And then Fred and I wrote Be Big, which I read from in 2008. And then we wrote Safe Enough to Soar, which was about accelerating trust, collaboration, and inclusion in the workplace. And really kind of that whole notion about interaction safety. It was interesting because at the time, although Amy Edmondson had talked a lot about psychological safety, a lot of our clients did not want to talk about mental health in the workplace. So the whole psychological safety was one in which people were concerned because they didn't feel like they could go there. Now, obviously, things have changed some, as we've talked about mental health issues a lot more in the workplace. But we really coined the phrase interaction safety as a way to say, is this interaction safe? How do you create that? And how do you diagnose where an organization is? The book that's coming out this fall with our colleague Monica Biggs is called Creating Inclusive Cultures with Change Champions, a dialogic approach, which is using some concepts people may be familiar with, the dialogic OD, organization development. And it really kind of takes a deep dive into an intervention that we've used to create change champions in an organization to really accelerate change. And thinking about how peer-to-peer leadership in most organizations is where you have the most push, not top down. So we really describe with some case examples, et cetera, about how to really get the organization to accelerate change in that way. And the thing we know is that there's wisdom in organizations. It's how do you unleash it? Many people in the organization know what could be better. And I think part of our job is creating that container, that's that safe environment for people to be able to speak to what that is. So we're pretty excited about that book coming out. And then Fred and I are cooking on a new Be Big book. So we'll see how that goes. We're still in its infancy, but there'll be more. There'll be others. Those are kind of like the things that we're most excited about these days.
Well, that's great. And I just encourage everyone, given all of the wealth that Fred and Judith bring to this topic, to look forward to creating inclusive cultures with change champions, a dialogic approach, Fred Miller, Judith Katz, and Monica Biggs. But as we just begin to wrap up, Fred, are there certain topics that are capturing your interest now, and that at the Kaleel Jamison Consulting Group? What's current?
We're in a major paradigm shift. And Joel Barker talked a lot about paradigms and talked about when a paradigm shifts, everybody goes back to zero. And what Judith and I have been saying is when a paradigm shifts, everybody goes forward to zero. And I think that's where we are. We're in a new world, a new place, new things that we need to understand and do. So one of our clients a while ago got everybody a cap and a hat in the organization, said, get different, because everybody needs to get different. I think those hats need to be done now in many, many organizations. We have a client we're working with that's a major utility company. And one of the things that the leader said is, we have been a utility company focused on X, and we have hired people to do X. The world has shifted. The people that we have now are not trained for the world that we're going to. And I think that's going to be true in lots and lots of organizations, that they have built an organization on the old paradigm, built an organization on an old reality, the old consumer, the old way of doing things. And now the shift is so magnificent that almost a new set of people, a new group of people need to be in the organization. We used to be regulator focused. Now we got to be more consumer focused. Well, that might not be the same brain working those two things. Now, obviously, some people can, but some people not. How do these organizations, and there's sure many, many organizations, how do we go from this is the type of person we used to need in order to do what our core work was, to we still got the same mission, but the way we do our core work is so dramatically different that same old mindset that people had won't be successful in the new world. Can we train and transform them, or do we need to bring in new people? It's probably a combination of both of those answers.
And how robotics informs that, how AI informs that, how changing economies inform that.
It's the most exciting time. I've been saying to people for a few years now, if you like change, you are in the right time. And if you don't like change, I don't know what you're going to do about it, because this is where we are, and it's dramatic and it's fast, and nobody knows the answers, which makes it exciting and means that the more we have a we trying to solve problems versus our I trying to solve problems, the more likely we're going to be successful.
So great. And just as we wrap up, and before I give people some information about how to reach both Fred and Judith at the Kaleel Jamison Consulting Group, which you can find them at kjcj.com. Just before we get to more information, I'd like to offer Fred and Judith an opportunity just for a closing comments, some thoughts, some inspirations for the listeners of the Authentic Change podcast, people who are trying to bring more of who they are to what they do. Fred or Judith?
I think the big thing is to trust yourself and to have courage. And I think those are parts of the things that are so important to being authentic and being yourself as a leader, and to not let fear stop you. So those would be my words.
That's great. Thank you so much.
I would say amen, amen. And I would say we can do this. We can do this. We can make this transition. This is the evolution of the human species. We can do this. The evolution of the workplace. We can do this. And the advantages, what we will gain from the greater inclusion, respect, valuing, joining of people is immense. It's beyond our imagination. And we've never been able to do it as fully as we have the opportunity to do it now. So we're at a inflection point around people and people interacting with people and learning and growing together. And then just creating things that are beyond our imagination today. That's what's ahead of us. And we will, I'm an optimist, we will do that. And it's going to take all of us working together and start, as you said before, it starts with small groups of people coming together with a vision and energy and a belief that life can be better than it is today.
That's great. For everyone in the audience, I mean, it's a great energy in which to, end our podcast with two innovators, Frederick A. Miller, Judith H. Katz, with that energy of don't let fear stop us, and we can do this. Just a nice energy there. And, once again, to get in touch with the Kaleel Jamison Consulting Group, you'll find all of this in the show notes, and we'll include in our show notes for everyone some statements about who we are at the Kaleel Jamison Consulting Group, so that you'll be able to access that. But I encourage people to visit Fred and Judith at kjcg.com, the Kaleel Jamison Consulting Group. And if you want to get in touch with Judith or Fred directly, to reach Judith Katz at kjcg.com or Fred411 at kjcg.com. And again, you'll find all of this in the show notes. Fred and Judith, such a delight, such an honor to be with you. Congratulations on all the work that you're doing and the fabulous way that you're helping us to make progress and to make the world a more caring place and a place where people and organizations be their best.
Thank you, Mike, and all that right back to you.
Thank you so much. Until the next episode of the Authentic Change podcast, stay well. Thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast. I'm delighted that you've tuned in to listen. Please visit the show notes for links to topics discussed in today's podcast. To download a free ebook on authentic change and leadership and to subscribe to my newsletter, please visit mike-horn.com. Once again, mike-horne.com, mike-horn.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast.